Daniel woke up to the gentle light of the morning sun spilling into his bedroom. The curtains swayed softly with the cool breeze coming through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of hay and the low, lazy sounds of animals beginning their day. For Daniel, this was the best part of living on a farm. No alarm clocks, no blaring horns from the city, just the rhythm of nature. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms before swinging his feet onto the wooden floor. The creak of the old boards under his weight was a familiar comfort. This house had been in his family for decades. Every sound in it was like a memory. In the kitchen, the kettle was already heating on the stove. Daniel had developed a habit of starting his mornings with a hot cup of coffee, sipping it while looking out over the fields. He poured the steaming drink into his favorite mug, the one with a faded picture of a tractor that had been chipped along the rim. Leaning against the counter, he took that first slow sip, letting the warmth spread through him as his eyes wandered toward the window. The view never got old. Wide open fields, the barn standing proudly in the distance, and the sight of a few goats lazily moving about, searching for the freshest bits of grass. He had a list of things to do that day, but none of it felt rushed. He planned to fix the south fence, check the feed levels in the barn, and maybe spend some time oiling the hinges on the old red gate near the road. Quiet, simple day. That's what he expected. But life has a strange way of adding surprises when you least want them. Around mid-morning, while Daniel was crouched near the chicken coop scattering feed, he heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel. He straightened up, brushing the dust from his jeans, and looked toward the dirt road that ran alongside his property. A white SUV was slowly making its way toward his front gate. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass by. Tourists sometimes got lost and ended up on the back roads. But something about the way this vehicle moved caught his attention. It wasn't passing by. It was stopping. The SUV rolled to a halt, right by the main entrance. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off. Daniel squinted in the sunlight, trying to get a better look. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman he had never seen before. She was dressed in an oversized pastel pink tracksuit, her hair tied back into a tight bun, and she wore sunglasses so large they seemed to cover half her face. She stood there for a moment, surveying the farm with an expression that made Daniel feel like she was evaluating it as if it were on trial. He started walking toward the gate, thinking maybe she was lost and needed directions. But before he could even get within speaking distance, she placed both hands on her hips and called out in a sharp, accusing tone, "You can't keep animals in these conditions. This is outrageous." Daniel froze mid-step, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "I'm sorry?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Calling the authorities, she announced loudly, making sure every word carried across the open space between them. "These animals are clearly neglected. Look at them." She gestured broadly toward the pasture, as if pointing out some horrible crime scene. Daniel blinked, glancing over his shoulder at his animals. The goats were happily chewing on grass. The cows in the distance were lazily swishing their tails. Even the chickens seemed content, pecking at the feed he had just scattered. Nothing about the scene looked remotely like neglect. He took another step forward. "Ma'am, I think you might be—" But she cut him off with a raised hand, already speaking into her phone. "Yes, I'm at a property where there's clear animal abuse happening," she said dramatically, pacing near her SUV as she talked. "Yes, multiple animals. They're thin, they look sick, and the man here is acting suspicious." She shot him a glance full of disdain as she continued talking to whoever was on the other end. "Yes, I feel unsafe. Please send someone quickly." Daniel's eyebrows knitted together. Unsafe? Suspicious? He hadn't even gotten within 20 feet of her. He wasn't sure whether to laugh at the absurdity or be annoyed at the trouble she was about to cause. He took a slow breath, deciding it was better to stay calm. Raising his voice wouldn't help. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you're seeing, but my animals are healthy, and this is a registered farm." She ignored him completely, walking closer to the fence to snap pictures with her phone. He could hear the sharp clicking of the camera each time she aimed it at something: his goats, the barn, even his truck parked in the driveway. "This is all evidence," she muttered to herself. "They won't get away with this."
Daniel
ran a hand over his face. Whoever this woman was, she seemed determined to create a problem where none existed. Her confidence was almost unsettling, like she truly believed she was a hero swooping in to save the day. She spoke into her phone again, her voice rising in fake urgency. "Yes, the animals are in poor shape. Yes, I'll stay on the scene until help arrives." Help? She was talking about the sheriff's department, Daniel realized. And if she had called 911, there would be no avoiding it. Deputies would come. They'd have to, even if just to check the situation. He could already imagine the wasted time, the explanations, the unnecessary inspection. It wasn't that Daniel had anything to hide. He prided himself on the way he cared for his animals. But the thought of someone barging into his life like this, based on nothing but her own assumptions, made his jaw tighten. "Ma'am, if you just let me explain," he tried again, stepping closer to the gate. "Stay back." She snapped, holding up a hand as if he were some kind of threat. "Yes. Know my rights, and I know animal cruelty when I see it." Her voice was so loud now that the goats had stopped chewing and were staring curiously in her direction. Even the chickens seemed to pause, tilting their heads as if wondering what the fuss was about. Daniel resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He had met his share of difficult people before, but something about this woman's self-righteousness was on another level. She continued pacing by the fence, sometimes stepping onto the dirt road, sometimes leaning over to get a better angle for her pictures. Daniel noticed how she seemed to be deliberately making herself look like a concerned witness, caught in the middle of a crisis. Probably for whatever video she was filming. It wasn't just about the animals. She wanted a story. She was going to get one, even if she had to make it up. Daniel could faintly hear the sound of distant sirens in the air. They were still far away, but they were getting closer. Corinne, though. He didn't yet know that was her name, smiled in a way that made his stomach turn. It was the smile of someone who thought she had already won, that her version of events would be the only one that mattered. He stood there, coffee now forgotten, the warmth in his mug long gone. What had started as a peaceful, sunny morning on? His farm was turning into a scene straight out of some bizarre reality show, with him as the unwilling star. And from the determined look on the woman's face, he knew this was only the beginning of whatever storm was about to hit. Daniel stood there in the dirt, hands in his pockets, watching the woman march along the fence like she owned the place. The sound of her shoes crunching against the gravel was sharp and fast, matching the impatient rhythm of her voice as she kept talking into her phone. She didn't seem the slightest bit interested in hearing him out. And the more she moved around, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a misunderstanding she wanted cleared up. She wanted to fight. She stepped closer to the fence, lifting her phone high to take pictures of his goats. "Look at this," she muttered loudly enough for him to hear. "Skin and bones. This is criminal." Daniel glanced at the animals again. They were plump, healthy, and content. Some chewing hay while others lazily scratched their sides against the fence posts. If anything, they looked spoiled. The only crime here was that she didn't know the first thing about livestock. But he didn't bother pointing that out, yet experience told him that certain types of people, the ones who came in with accusations instead of questions, never really listened to answers. "Ma'am," he tried again, keeping his voice steady. "These animals are healthy. I've been raising livestock for years. You're welcome to. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid," she snapped, lowering her phone just long enough to glare at him over her oversized sunglasses. "I've seen videos of farms like this before. I know what you people do, you people." The words hit like tiny sparks. He didn't ask her what she meant, though something told him the list of her assumptions was too long to unpack. "Hey!" Stepped closer, one hand gripping the fence while she angled her phone for another shot of the pasture. The goats, sensing her energy, backed away a little. One of the younger ones bleated nervously, and Daniel's jaw clenched. She immediately pointed at the animal like she had caught him red-handed. "See, that one's scared of you. He's scared of you," Daniel muttered under his breath. She didn't hear him or pretended not to. Instead, she switched to recording video, walking along the fence line and narrating in a dramatic tone. "I am currently at a farm in terrible condition. The animals are frightened. The owner is being aggressive. Daniel let out a slow breath, staring at the ground for a moment before looking back up at her. I'm not being aggressive. You're on my property, accusing me of things you have no proof of. Why don't you? I have plenty of proof, she interrupted. And when the police get here, they'll see what I see. This whole place will be shut down. There it was, the smug certainty that made his skin crawl. She spoke as if she had already decided the verdict, as if the deputies showing up were nothing more than a formality before they dragged him away in handcuffs. The chickens in the nearby coop were starting to make more noise now, clucking and rustling their feathers. They weren't used to strangers pacing back and forth so close to their space. Daniel noticed how even the cows in the far pasture had lifted their heads, their big dark eyes following the movement of the woman in pink. Animals could sense tension, and right now the air was full of it. Daniel took a step toward the gate, careful to keep his hands visible. Look, you're free to wait for the deputies, but stop harassing my animals. Step back from the fence. She let out a laugh that was more of a scoff. Harassing. I'm documenting. There's a difference. When this hits the news, you'll wish you'd been nicer to me. The wind carried a faint sound in the distance, the wail of sirens, still far off but getting closer. She heard it too, and her entire demeanor shifted from defensive to triumphant. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hear that? That's help coming. They'll handle you. Daniel didn't reply. He knew the deputies. They weren't the kind to believe wild accusations without evidence, but that didn't mean this would be quick or painless. Even if everything went smoothly, there would still be paperwork, questions, the time wasted dealing with someone who refused to see reason. She turned her phone toward herself, flipping the camera to record a selfie-style video. To everyone watching, she said in an exaggerated voice, I just want you to know that I'm safe for now, but I'm standing my ground. These poor animals, she turned the camera back toward. The goats deserve better than this. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, glancing back at the barn. He could have gone inside, ignored her, and waited for the deputies to arrive, but that felt wrong. This was his property, his livelihood. He wasn't about to let her parade around, making up stories without at least challenging her nonsense. So he walked slowly toward the gate, stopping just on his side of it. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to answer, then said, My name doesn't matter. What matters is that someone finally stood up for these animals. He gave a small, humorless chuckle. You don't even know what these animals are supposed to look like, do you? That earned him another glare. I know enough to see they're not well. Daniel shook his head. They're healthier than most dogs you see in town. But I guess you're not here to learn anything. She turned away, pretending to be deeply interested in filming the goats again. Save your excuses for the officers, she said. The sirens grew louder now, the sound bouncing off the open fields. Daniel could see her shoulders straighten as she adjusted her sunglasses and brushed imaginary dust from her tracksuit. She was preparing for her moment, ready to play the part of the brave whistleblower who had exposed some terrible cruelty. He couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever been right about anything in her life. By the time the sirens were close enough to feel the vibrations in the ground, Daniel had decided he wouldn't raise his voice once during whatever came next. He would let the facts speak for themselves. But he also knew that some people, no matter how much evidence you showed them, never changed their minds. Looking at her, he was pretty sure she was one of those people. The woman positioned herself near the gate, clearly intending to intercept the deputies the second they stepped out of their vehicles. She kept glancing back at him, like a cat guarding its prey. Daniel stayed where he was, standing tall, his hands resting loosely at his sides. The goats wandered away from the fence, uninterested in the drama, and the sun beat down on the scene, casting long shadows across the dirt. In the space between the last echo of the sirens and the crunch of tires pulling up the drive, Daniel caught himself thinking about how quickly a peaceful day could turn into a standoff. It wasn't anger he felt now, it was a kind of tired amusement, the same feeling you get when you realize a storm is coming, whether you like it or not. And all you can do is stand there and watch the clouds roll in. The white SUV was still parked crooked near the gate. The woman straightened her posture, lifting her chin high as if she were about to address the press. Daniel exhaled slowly, glancing at his animals one more time before looking toward the driveway. The deputies would be here any second, and judging by the satisfied smirk on her face, she was ready to make her move. The sound of engines grew louder, and Daniel could now see a faint cloud of dust rising from the far end of the road. The woman's head snapped toward it, and her lips curled into a smile that was far too self-satisfied for the situation. Adjusted her sunglasses again, pulled her phone up for another video, and said in a rehearsed tone, "Help is arriving now. Finally, these poor animals will be saved." She spoke like she was narrating a news story. As if she had been waiting for this moment her whole life, Daniel stood still. Leaning one arm on the fence, his coffee mug long forgotten back by the chicken coop. He had dealt with all sorts of situations in his years on the farm, but this was something else. He could feel the tension in the air, not just from her, but from the animals too. The goats had wandered farther into the pasture. The cows were watching silently from a distance, and the chickens were huddled together near the corner of their coop. Animals could sense when something wasn't right, and they were picking up on every ounce of the human drama unfolding. Within moments, 2 sheriff's vehicles appeared, tires crunching over the gravel. The first one was a black and white SUV, with the county logo on the side, the second a pickup used for rural patrols. Both rolled to a stop near the gate, and the faint hum of their engines filled the air. The woman immediately straightened, waving her arms in the air like she was signaling an airplane to land. "Over here," she shouted, her voice carrying across the quiet farmland. "I'm the one who called. It's worse than I said on the phone." Daniel almost smiled at the ridiculousness of it all. She had managed to turn a perfectly peaceful morning into some kind of bizarre rescue mission, except there was nothing to rescue. 2 deputies stepped out of the SUV. The first was a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing sunglasses and a tan uniform. Daniel recognized him instantly, Deputy Harris, someone he'd worked with before on agricultural inspections. The second deputy was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a clipboard tucked under one arm. They both glanced toward Daniel, then toward the woman who was already speed-walking toward them like she was late for an appointment. "Officers. Thank God you're here," she began without taking a breath. "I was driving by, and I saw the most horrific sight. These animals are being kept in horrible conditions. They're underfed, they're scared. And this man," she jabbed a finger in Daniel's direction, "is acting suspicious and aggressive toward me." Daniel kept his face calm, even though every word she said was a lie. He knew better than to interrupt. People like her thrived on interruptions, so they could play the victim. He let her go on, her voice getting more dramatic with each sentence. "I've seen farms like this shut down before," she continued. "They hide the abuse behind fences, but I'm not fooled. I have pictures, I have videos, I've documented everything." She pulled her phone from her pocket and waved it like it was a smoking gun. The deputies exchanged a quick glance. Then Harris turned to Daniel. "Morning, Dan," he said with a small nod. "Mind if we take a look around?" "At all," Daniel replied easily. "You know the drill." The woman seemed taken aback by the familiarity in their exchange. "Why do you know him?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Harris didn't answer her directly. Instead, he gestured toward the gate. "We'll start with the barns and work our way out." Daniel walked over, unlatched the gate, and motioned for them to follow. "Watch your step. Some spots are muddy," he said. The younger deputy scribbled a note on his clipboard as they stepped onto the property. The woman trailed closely behind, her phone still recording as she muttered under her breath about cover-ups and good old boys protecting each other. She kept darting around to get different angles of the animals, as if hoping one of them might suddenly look miserable enough to prove her right. They started at the barn, where the earthy smell of hay mixed with the faint scent of feed. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, illuminating the rows of neatly stacked bales and clean water troughs. A couple of goats poked their heads in curiously, sniffing the deputy's boots. The younger deputy knelt down to scratch one behind the ears, and the goat leaned into it, clearly enjoying the attention. "These are the ones you said were underfed?" Harris asked, glancing back at the woman. "Yes," she said quickly, though her voice wavered just a little. "They must have been fed this morning to make it look better." Daniel hid a smirk. "You're welcome to check the feed storage," he said. "Nothing hidden here." They moved on to the pasture, where the cows grazed lazily. Their coats were shiny in the sunlight, and their bellies were round from a steady diet of fresh grass. A calf trotted up to the fence, curious about the visitors, and the younger deputy chuckled as it licked his hand. "They're in good shape," Harris said simply, writing something down. The woman crossed her arms tightly. "You're not looking closely enough. There has to be something wrong." Daniel led them to the chicken coop next. Inside, the hens were pecking at fresh grain, their feathers smooth and clean. A couple of eggs sat in the straw-filled boxes, still warm from being laid that morning. The air was fresh, not the foul, sour smell that came from neglected coops. "Looks good," Harris remarked. The woman huffed. "Looks can be deceiving. Could have cleaned all this up right before you came." Daniel finally turned to her, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "Ma'am, I didn't even know you existed before you pulled up at my gate this morning. But you seemed convinced I staged all this in the past hour." She looked away, muttering something under her breath. The tour continued through the rest of the property. Everywhere they went, the animals were healthy, the facilities clean, and the supplies well stocked. The deputies took notes, asked a few questions, and seemed satisfied with every answer. By the time they circled back to the gate, the woman's confidence had dimmed, though she still stood tall, phone in hand, as if hoping for a last-minute twist in her favor. Harris turned to Daniel. "Everything checks out here. Appreciate your cooperation." Daniel nodded, of course. Then Harris looked at the woman. "Ma'am, we didn't find anything to suggest neglect or abuse. Everything here is in line with proper animal care." Her mouth opened slightly. "What? No, that can't be right. You must have missed something. Look again." The younger deputy closed his notebook. "We've seen enough." Her expression flickered between disbelief and frustration, like she couldn't decide whether to argue or retreat. Daniel could see her searching for something, anything to hold on to in her version of events. But it was clear to everyone now that she had been wrong from the start. Still, he could tell from the stubborn set of her jaw that she wasn't going to admit it. People like her never did. The air hung thick with an awkward silence after Deputy Harris gave his verdict. Daniel stood by the fence, calm and still, while the woman whose name he still didn't know looked like someone had just yanked the rug out from under her. Her lips pressed together, her nostrils flared slightly. And behind those oversized sunglasses, Daniel imagined her eyes darting around, looking for a way to twist the situation back into her favor. Her voice came out sharp, but there was a wobble. "In it now, you can't just walk away from this. There's something wrong here. I can feel it. You need to keep looking." The younger deputy, who had been flipping through his notes, closed his notepad with a small snap and slid it back into his pocket. "Ma'am, we've inspected the property thoroughly. There's no evidence of abuse or neglect. Everything's well within proper standards. Frankly, these animals are in better condition than most we see." She crossed her arms, shaking her head like she couldn't accept what she was hearing. No, you don't understand. He's hiding something. They always hide something. People like him." She cut herself off, but the damage was done. Her tone had that same bitter, accusing edge she'd had from the moment she stepped out of her SUV. Harris tilted his head slightly. "People like him?" he repeated, not in an angry way, but in that calm, steady voice law enforcement uses when they're making note of every word. She seemed to realize she'd pushed too far and quickly shifted her stance. "I'm just saying. I've read about these places. They put on a good face when the authorities show up. But behind the scenes, Daniel, who had been quietly letting her ramble, decided this was the moment. His patience had been stretched thin, but he wasn't angry. He was deliberate. He stepped forward just a little, his boots crunching in the gravel. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you've spent all morning accusing me, calling me dangerous, and wasting emergency resources. You told lies about my animals and about me, without knowing a single thing about who I am or what I do." Straightened her shoulders, bracing for an argument. "I know enough to see what's wrong," but Daniel didn't let her finish. Instead, he reached behind him, pulling something from his back pocket. It was a simple leather wallet, the kind that folds open in the middle. With a quiet, deliberate motion, he flipped it open and held it out so everyone could see. Inside, resting behind a clear plastic cover, was a shiny badge. It caught the sunlight instantly, the silver glinting so brightly that she instinctively leaned back a little. Daniel spoke in the same calm tone he'd used all morning. "I'm not just a farmer. I'm a state agricultural investigator. I work directly with animal welfare agencies. Part of my job is to inspect farms and ranches to make sure animals are treated properly. So yes, if there was something wrong here, I'd be the first to know, and I'd be the first to report it." For a moment, it was as if the whole farm went still. The wind slowed, the goats in the distance stopped bleating, and the woman's face froze completely. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again, but no sound came out. It was the first time since she arrived that she didn't have something to say. Behind her sunglasses, Daniel imagined her eyes were wide, trying to process what she'd just heard. The deputies exchanged the faintest smirks. Harris even looked like he might chuckle if he weren't trying to stay professional. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, almost hesitant. I didn't know." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's the point. You didn't know. You made a judgment without asking questions, without listening, and without giving anyone the benefit of the doubt." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her bravado draining away like water through a sieve. "I was just concerned, I thought." Her voice trailed off as she glanced around. Like maybe she could find something, anything to prove she hadn't just embarrassed herself in front of everyone. "Concern is one thing," Daniel said, still steady but firmer now. "False accusations are another. You could have come in here, asked to see the animals, talked to me like a neighbor. Instead, you called 911 and told them I was dangerous. That's not concern, that's recklessness." The young deputy nodded slightly, clearly agreeing. Stood with his arms crossed, watching the exchange without interrupting. The woman gave a stiff shrug, trying to recover some of her earlier confidence. "Well, maybe I overreacted. But you can't blame me for caring about animals." Daniel took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but enough that she could feel the weight of his presence. Caring about animals means understanding them. It means knowing what's actually wrong and what's just in your imagination. You didn't save anyone today. All you did was waste the time of people who could be helping somewhere they're actually needed. Her jaw tightened, and for a second it looked like she might argue again. But then her gaze flicked to the badge still gleaming in his hand, and whatever words she had seemed to dissolve before she could say them. "Look," she mumbled finally. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I thought I was doing the right thing." Daniel slowly closed the badge wallet and slipped it back into his pocket. The right thing starts with getting the facts first. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The woman glanced at the deputies, as if looking for someone to back her up, but they stayed quiet. Harris's face was unreadable, though Daniel could see the faintest glimmer of amusement in his eyes. She turned back toward her SUV, muttering something about just trying to help under her breath. Her steps were slower now, her head a little lower. Like that proud, self-assured energy she'd had earlier was gone, replaced by something much smaller, something that looked a lot like shame. Daniel didn't call after her. He didn't need to. The badge had said everything that needed to be said. The deputies gave him a few final nods, thanked him again for his cooperation, and began heading back to their vehicles. The goats resumed their grazing, the chickens wandered back to peck at the dirt, and the farm returned to the quiet, peaceful rhythm it had before the interruption. Only one thing lingered in the air. Sense that the woman's world had shifted, even if just a little. She had walked onto that farm certain she was the hero of the story. Now she was leaving as something else entirely. For a few seconds after Daniel closed his badge wallet and slipped it back into his pocket, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint rustle of wind through the tall grass. The woman who had stormed onto his property with the confidence of a prosecutor in court now stood in silence, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her posture told Daniel everything she wasn't sure whether to speak, to leave, or to keep pretending she was right. Deputy Harris broke the silence first. "All right, I think we're done here," he said in his steady, professional tone. "Don, thanks for letting us look around. Everything's in great condition, as always." Daniel gave him a nod. "Anytime, Harris. You know the gates are always open for inspection." The younger deputy glanced at the woman. "Ma'am," he said politely but firmly, "false emergency calls take up resources that could be used somewhere else. I understand you thought there was a problem, but you need to be sure before making accusations." Her chin lifted just slightly, like she was trying to hold on to whatever pride she had left. "I understand," she said, but the words were flat and unconvincing. Daniel could have left it there. He could have turned around, gone back to his work, and let her drive away without another word. But something in him felt the need to finish what he'd started, not to humiliate her, but to make sure the lesson stuck. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, "I'm not going to press charges for the false report, but you need to know what you did today could have gone badly. If I were a different kind of person, or if the deputies didn't know me, this situation could have escalated fast. All because you jumped to conclusions." Her lips pressed together, and for a moment Daniel thought she might argue, but she didn't. She simply nodded once, almost reluctantly. "I guess I didn't think about that," she admitted. "That's the problem," Daniel said. "You didn't think?" Harris gave her a polite nod, clearly ready to wrap things up. "All right, ma'am, you're free to go. Just be more careful in the future." The woman turned and began walking toward her SUV. Her steps were slow, her head slightly down, not so much that she looked completely defeated, but enough to show she wasn't walking away in triumph. Daniel stayed where he was, leaning on the fence. Watching her go, she reached the vehicle, pulled open the driver's door, and paused for a moment, as if she might turn back and say something. But she didn't. Instead, she slid into the seat, shut the door, and started the engine. The hum of the motor filled the air, blending with the low clucks of the chickens nearby. The tires crunched on the gravel as she reversed, then swung the SUV around. As she drove off down the dirt road, dust rose in a long cloud behind her. She didn't look back, not once. When the sound of her vehicle finally faded into the distance, Daniel let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The deputies gave him one last nod before heading to their vehicles. Harris called out, "Take care, Dan. Try to have a quieter afternoon." Daniel smirked. "That's the plan." Watch them drive away, the gravel crackling under their tires, until they, too, disappeared down the road. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the farm was quiet again. Daniel turned back toward the barn. The goats were grazing as if nothing had happened. The cows had gone back to swishing their tails in the pasture, and the chickens were pecking at the dirt like they hadn't just witnessed a scene worthy of a television drama. Life on the farm had a way of snapping back to normal, no matter what storms blew through. He walked back to where he'd left his coffee mug near the chicken coop. It was stone cold now, but he took a sip anyway, just for the satisfaction of the moment. He leaned against the fence, letting the sun warm his face, and allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't wanted the trouble that morning, but he couldn't deny there was a certain satisfaction in the way it had ended. In town, news like this never stayed quiet for long. By the end of the day, Daniel knew people would be talking. Word would spread about the woman who came charging onto his farm, called the cops, and then found out the suspicious man she was accusing was an investigator with a badge. Small towns had long memories, and this story was bound to make the rounds at the diner, the post office, and the feed store. Sure enough, 2 days later, Daniel ran into old Mr. Carter at the hardware store. "Heard you had some excitement out at the farm," Carter said with a grin. "Something about a woman and some goats?" Daniel chuckled. "Something like that." Carter laughed and shook his head. "Bet she won't be coming back." Daniel agreed. "I don't think she will." Back at the farm, the days rolled on as usual. The fences still needed mending, the animals still needed feeding, and the sun still rose over the fields every morning. But every so often, when Daniel caught sight of a white SUV passing on the far road, he'd think back to that morning, the phone in her hand, the smug confidence, the look on her face when she saw the badge. He didn't hold a grudge. People made mistakes, especially when they acted on assumptions. But he hoped that somewhere in the quiet moments when she thought about that day, she'd remember the lesson. Because in the end, Daniel knew this wasn't just about his farm or his animals. It was about how easily people could decide they knew the truth without ever asking a question. Sometimes it took a little shock, like a badge shining in the sun, to make them stop and think before they acted. As the afternoon shadows stretched across the pasture, Daniel finished repairing the south fence, his mind already on the next day's work. The farm had been here long before that morning's drama, and it would be here long after. The goats bleated contentedly as he passed. One of the younger ones trotted up to nudge his leg. "Don't worry," Daniel said with a grin, scratching its head. "No more surprise visitors today." And with that, he walked back toward the house. The golden light of evening wrapping the farm in the kind of peace that only comes after a storm has passed.